Yes, today let's talk about common mistakes and challenges experienced in social science research. You'll agree with me that there are a lot of mistakes that are commonly experienced or committed when doing social science research. It is very important that the researcher or investigator quality assure the work, most especially at the proposal stage, to ensure that everything is in order so that when it comes to writing and or reporting, everything is in good order and it is not shameful to the author. We must not look back and feel ashamed after at the end of the day when we produced our work. But before I can start, let me remind you to subscribe to the channel. Also to give a thumbs up in case the video was of helpful to you, and also share the video with other fellows so that they can also benefit out of the video, and they can share further to share as a part of sharing the knowledge. And the last thing, whenever you feel you have a question or a comment, you are welcome to comment on the channel for further discussion and engagement. So before I waste much of the time, let's go further to talk to the content of. Yes, I want to advise that researchers must brainstorm their project before they can commence with the study or commence with researching. Like in most instances, like with the example that I give here on the structure or schematic illustration, normally I would recommend that the researchers start with identification of the problem for the research, and then they can formulate everything or interconnect everything to the problem going forward. Like for instance, in most instances, you'll find that the researchers identify or prefer to identify the title before everything, which to me is a different story, because sometimes you may identify the title and only to get surprised that there's no problem about the title. But if you start with the problem, then you formulate your title out of the problems that you identified, and also identify relevant sources, especially the primary sources such as newsletters, reports, and legislations to discuss and give a baseline to the problem of your study, and also introduce the problem to the reader. So with that in hand, with the problem in hand, I think everything will be very much easier. And because even your conceptual framework or theoretical framework, you must identify that based on the current problem for your study, because the two must also talk together. So it must be like a framework that is talking to your problem. And same applies to the aim or purpose, because purpose usually it is best formulated from your title, so that it can carry the overall elements of the study or the scope of the study. And that will simply mean it is connected to the problem, as long as the title is connected to the problem as well. And again, your objectives must also be derived or connected to the problem. It must be the elements that are talking to the problem of your study. And as such, this is similarly to the theoretical conceptual framework that you have chosen that is addressing your problem statement. The framework must also talk to the objective. Remember that the framework contains theories or concepts that are framing the your overall study. So without interconnecting the framework to the problem and also interconnecting your objectives to the framework, then your study is more likely to lead astray. So it's very important, you need to connect. You can formulate your objectives out of the framework elements, because remember the framework is already connected to the problem. So that is not going to give you a problem at all. Sorry. Same applies to the questions of the study. Questions of the study may be formulated simply by converting your objectives into questions, because the purpose of the questions is to address the objectives. So they need to talk together. And obviously, if you formulate your questions from the objectives, they will probably talk to the problem, your problem statement, because your objectives already are formulated from your problem, and the problem, the frameworks that are talking to the objectives also are formulated from the problem. So your methodology must also address the nature of your problem. It will depend on the complexity of the problem to say which approach or which worldview are you taking in conducting your study, and many other elements, including the population, structure, sampling, and all those other things. So the problem will guide you, and the population as well will guide you as to the kind of approach and worldview that you can adopt, because that will also take us to the literature review. The literature review is also very important to interconnect to other parts of your study already connected to the problem. In most instances, the best way is to formulate your literature review themes, most especially the main themes, from either the questions or objectives of your study, so that your literature must also address your objectives, remember. So if you don't properly connect it to the objectives, the likelihood is that you will be leading astray in your literature. You may find yourself reviewing the literature that does not address anything in the study, or that does not address the research problem. So remember, formulating the literature review items or themes or headings from the objectives automatically becomes connected to the problem, because the objective are already connected to the problem statement. So that is also applies to the other chapters, like your chapter for presentation of the findings. You may formulate your main themes based on the objectives, or even the literature review, because the literature review will be already formulated from the objectives, so that you avoid leading astray, and you also collect and present data that is going to address each of the objectives. And similarly, your data collection tools need to be formulated also based on the objectives, so that the main themes maybe in the data collection tools may need to be formulated from the objectives as well, so that when you collect data, you know you're collecting something which is going to talk to each of the objectives in your study, and it will address the problem of the study automatically. And that will lead to you presenting the right data, or collecting and presenting the right data in your chapter for presentation of the findings. And so is the same applies to other chapters, like the chapter for interpretation and discussion of the findings, because you'll be discussing the findings based on addressing particular objectives. So the main themes in particular are supposed to be talking to each of your objectives, so that everything is talking together and is interconnected in the study. And these are not the only things that need to be refocused based on the problem. These are only the only few elements in the research to present, so that I give example to you, and you can think about the rest. Yes, some of the common mistakes that are committed or experienced in the research, social science research, is that in some instances you find that the title does not have all the variables. It's either is having a dependent variable or independent variable, but the other variable is missing. That is going to confuse the reader as to the focus of the study. So it is very much important to show all the variables or reflect all the variables in the title of the study. Again, the other titles you find that they don't reflect the phenomenon or context of the research, and it does not show the area of the study. So the reader will never know who exactly is this study focused on, which organization, which institution, which country are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the whole world, and which subject area, specific subject area are you focused on? So this is some of the things that need to be covered in the title of the study. So in some instances, you find that the title of the study does not link or talk to the problem statement or even the background to the study. So once this is identified, it means, or it will show to the reader that the title is for something else and the background is also talking to something else. It means these are two different studies altogether. This is very much important to fix to ensure that readers are able to interconnect all the elements of the study. So in some studies, you find that the table of content are not having other items that are contained in the study, especially when it comes to auto creation of the table of content. You'll find that the system automatically miss some of the items. So this needs the researcher or the author to quality assure the table of content to make sure that every element or item in the content is also covered in the table of content. In some instances, the other mistakes is that you'll find that in the table of content, under certain items, you also see the content. So this commonly happens with the auto creation of the table of content, in which the system automatically take the narrative under a particular heading or theme. So the researcher will need to verify that and try to remove the content and keep only the theme or the title in the table of content. Sometimes the other mistakes that we commonly come across is the situation whereby the theoretical or conceptual framework does not link to the study at all, especially to the objectives of the study or even the problem statement. So it is very important for the researcher or the author to ensure that any theory or concepts or conceptual framework generally is interconnected to the problem statement and is also talking to objectives, so that going down, it is framing the overall study. Otherwise, the reason why it's named a framework, it means you are framing your study based on it. And in some instances, or commonly, you'll come across poor flow in the discussion, especially in the background statement and literature review. So this is very important so that the reader can enjoy going through your work. To quality assure. In some instances, I'll advise that researchers or authors, you discuss your issues from general to specific, or from international to local to national, and also ensure that you discuss one issue or idea per paragraph. Do not mix issues in your discussion. That will improve in the flow of your discussion. Your background must also show a research gap. What is it that was not researched or was not covered in the previous studies? Or what is it that is missing in the area where you are studying? So you must show the gaps that maybe your study is also intending to cover or to close. And your introduction and background, it must also give a clear context to the study. It must give us the baseline to say what is the situation before and now, and what is it, where are you taking us? So the introduction and background must orientate the reader into the context. The problem statement need to point out the problem. Sometimes going through some studies, you find that the problem statement only discuss the background as if it's the continuation of the background statement and introduction, and not pointing out any problem that the study is intending to solve or bring solution or identify. So one must identify the difference between the background and the problem statement. So if you can have a demarcation between the two, then you will understand what is required of you in the section for the problem statement. So you need to point out the main problem of the study, even if you can provide more discussion around it. Purpose or aim. In some studies, you find that is not connected to the title. So this takes us back to the situation where the background is not connected to the title. This means also your objectives and purpose is not for this study, is for another study, or either the title is for another study. So you make sure that your objectives and purposes are talking to the title of your study. And also, as I said also in the brainstorming in the previous slide, the objectives are supposed to be connected to the problem and the theoretical or conceptual framework, so that going down, everything is interconnected and is the elements for the same system, if I can put it. And the objectives, unlike the purpose, are supposed to be a little bit more specific than the purpose, which is more generic or covering the overall study goal. The other thing that one should ensure as a researcher is to ensure that the research questions are aligned to the objectives, like I said before in the brainstorming. So the two must talk together because the questions must bring the answers that address the objectives. Your significance of the study must be convincing that your study is indeed significant or important. So here you motivate the importance of conducting the study in hand, or the study that has already been conducted. Why was it necessary for the study to be conducted? Is it really necessary? Yes, you must show that how the study is going to assist the target institutions or related organizations, and what this study is going to bring on the table to the benefit of the community, the clients, or people receiving service to that organization. Originality of the study, especially in case of the PhD project, need to be convincing that indeed the study will yield original results, and it is not a duplication of other studies conducted in the past or previously conducted, because we don't need to conduct the study for the sake of conducting it or have results for the sake of having them, but we want something new that can add to the body of knowledge or even bring a new solution to the problem. The scope and the limitation of the study also need to be clear. You need to explain exactly your coverage, your inclusion and exclusion in terms of the population and in terms of organization and its structures, so that the reader will be clear about the focus of the study and where the study was moving and what was exactly researched. The literature review themes that does not address objective clearly is also a problem. As I said in the brainstorming, in order to avoid leading astray, you may need to formulate your literature review themes, more especially the main themes from each of your objectives, and you can have sub-themes under each main theme going down, depending on the literature that you are discovering as you review, whether it is possible to scatter them into sub-themes or not. That is very important to ensure that your study does not lead astray. In some instances, you find that the researchers rely much on mostly dated sources. So it is very much important that the researcher review the most latest sources to avoid talking things of the olden days. Remember, the situation changed from time to time with the change of situation and technology. So you may find that you're still talking about things that are already dated, or strategies that are already that are dated, and we have a new solution discovered by other latest studies, but you're still talking about the old solution which were not working for other organizations. So very important to review latest sources. Data collection tools you must also ensure that your data collection tools does not have gaps, so that you can be able to collect sufficient data when you go into the field. Otherwise, the possibilities might be the examiners, if your studies for academic qualification, may require that certain missing data be collected. So you may find yourself going back to the field after examination of your work. So that is very important to ensure that your data collection tools covers almost everything that will be required in your interpretation and discussion of the findings, and also recommendations. You must not be recommend solutions in the dark. The presentation of information not adding value is also very a serious mistake or common mistake in research, especially when it goes to the literature review. So in the literature review, be careful only to present literature that is addressing your objectives under each and every main theme. Do not bring anything because it is part of the subject area, even if it's not addressing any issue in your study. That is very important, and this can bring a problem of making your research report very long unnecessarily. So you need to only present information that addresses your objectives. And this is the same applies to the data that you are supposed to collect. You make sure that every data that you collect is going to address something in your objectives. You don't collect and present data that is not going to add any value in your discussion, in your recommendation, in your conclusion, and all those other research elements. And some other serious mistakes is ignorance of important readings or sources, especially recommended by supervisors or study leaders or core investigator. So it is very, 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 very important that you follow, you identify those sources and include them in your discussion and in your study in particular. Thank you for watching, and again, do not forget to give a thumbs up if the video was of great assistance to you, or it was helpful to you, or it has assisted you to solve your problems in one way or another. And should you have any comment or a question, put it on the comment chat so that we discuss further or try to help further. And more importantly, share the video with other people who are interested in the subject matter, or your students and colleagues. And lastly, subscribe to the channel so that we are able to notify you should other videos becomes available. Thank you.